Okay, so I decided to look at Antigua and Barbuda for my case study of their coastal zones. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at their location, exactly where they are. We'll look at some of their natural and coastal features. I'll take you through a recent history of the coastal zones in particular, the coral reefs, mangroves, and the beaches. We'll have a look at the impact of climate change on some of these areas and what it means for the Caribbean and for the island of Antigua and Barbuda. And then we'll have a look at some of the challenges that there have been in the management of the coastal zones and likely to be in the future. Okay, so where is it? I'm sure you know it's the Caribbean, which is sort of roughly the one standing in the way, sort of, which is sort of there. Basically, the Antigua and Barbuda, they're twin islands, there's the same country. They're the emergent island parts of something called the Barbuda Bank, which stretches for something like 3,500 kilometres underneath. Antigua itself is about 270 square kilometres. About 40 kilometres to the north is Barbuda, which is about 155 square kilometres. Antigua, formed by a volcano, which is in the southwest, this doesn't point, but it is in the sort of southwest of the island. It's mainly sort of hilly limestone in the east, and then volcanic material in the middle. But the volcano only rises to about 410 metres, it's not particularly huge. Barbuda, on the other hand, is a low-lying coral limestone island, not rising to more than about 60 metres at its highest. And what's of huge importance to Barbuda is this lagoon here called the Codrington Lagoon, which I'll mention a bit more as we go through. So, coastal features then, Antigua is sort of pretty famous really for having 365 beaches, one for every day of the year, they say. In addition to that, there are, or were, 36 mangrove forests, lagoons, watershed and wetland systems, coral reef systems, offshore coral reefs, algae beds, rocky shores, and I put it under coastal features just because it sort of seemed to fit in there, which is there have been the creation of 4 MPAs, marine protected areas in Antigua, and 2 in Barbuda, one of which covers the North Lagoon. The effectiveness of those we'll have a look at later on. And what's equally important about the coastal, of course, like many Caribbean islands, the vast majority of GDP, the vast majority of human activity comes from the coastal zones, and in Antigua's case, 70% of their GDP comes from tourism, and just 2% now from fishing, and that's really changed since probably the sort of mid-80s when tourism began to kind of take off quite a bit. Barbuda itself doesn't currently have any tourism. It's well, there's no doing it at the moment, but anyway, there's no tourism there, it's all in Antigua. So, recent history-wise then, coral reefs. They are, of course, incredibly important to their GDP, both from a tourism point of view and ecotourism point of view, people going to dive, see the reef, all that kind of stuff, and from fishing. However, they have been in severe decline since the early 1940s. We're lucky enough to have one study that had aerial photographs from 1941, and in 1981 they took some more aerial photographs of the same place. Unfortunately, they discovered that there's a huge amount of they couldn't quantify it exactly, but you can see from photographs just how much degradation of the hatch reefs, there being associated loss of seagrass beds and on the reef flats. Hurricanes are increasing in intensity due to climate warming. We just have to look at what happened last year with Irma and Maria, which led to the eventual evacuation of Barbuda as a whole. It's thought that the climate warming doesn't necessarily increase frequency, but it certainly does the intensity, so winds are higher, the rains are heavier when they come. There has been a dramatic reduction in both soft and hard live coral. One study showed that as much as up to 22% of the soft and hard live coral has disappeared since the 80s, down from a covering of sort of maybe 30% to as little as 2% in some areas of the reefs. One of the reasons for this could be increasing sediment loads. As the climate warms, the temperatures actually, as a mean, get drier. Droughts, which have always been a problem now, are increasing. There's soil erosion coastal erosion, removal of healthy mangroves, which I'll look at in a minute, anchor damage from boating activities, storm and hurricane damage, natural disease and predation all have contributed to the degradation of the coral reefs. Mangroves, there were 36, there's a lot less now. They are of course vital to protect coastal systems from sedimentation and waste from runoff and erosion and reduce the impact of storms on the island. They're important breeding and nursery environments. The lagoon and mangrove forest up in Codrington, where there's 3 species of lobster that the local fishermen retire on, well they will be retiring on it, rely on entirely for their income, so they're very important. Recent hurricanes have cleared some of the areas, but the main problem has been anthropogenic. There's been complete removal for building, where they've moved stuff out to create room for building. The waste has gone into some of the mangrove forests because they've just, it's been a handy place just to dump it all. Nobody really noticed, and of course this has led to their death. But again, Codrington is a good example of actually where an MPA has taken effect and they've done something with it, and it's largely unaffected at the moment. That all may change. From a beach's point of view, beach erosion is a significant problem. There is legislation relating to where and where you can't build hotels and houses, but nobody really takes any notice of it. This means houses being built too close to the beach and taken away. There's an enormous problem with sand mining, which is basically there's something called the Beach Protection Act, and that's supposed to stop people from taking sand from the beaches and using it either for building houses or for putting it in ships as ballast. But because it's largely ignored, huge amounts of the natural resources have been, natural defences of the island has been removed. If you have a look at what happened last year to Barbuda, obviously increased storm wave surges from the hurricanes led to increased flooding, and because there are no natural defences there in terms of sand dunes, because it all been removed for building, the whole place flooded. The consequence of this is that 90% of the structures on the island were damaged or destroyed. Half the people lost their homes. The infrastructure was pretty much destroyed all over, and the entire population is evacuated. And in fact, I can't see it at the moment, but I don't think anybody's actually returned to Barbuda even now. It's still, there may be things going on that we don't know about, but anyway, that's for future study. Okay. So current threats, and obviously global warming is aside from the anthropogenic threat, then global warming is the big one. Modern climate change, of course, I think we can all widely agree is down to anthropogenic effects leading to a change in the atmospheric composition and increased CO2 in the atmosphere. This warming climate, as I've said before, leads to an increasing intensity of tropical cyclones, not necessarily frequency of these tropical cyclones, and once they reach 74 miles an hour turn into hurricanes. So these obviously is leading the coastal zones vulnerable with the removal of mangroves, removal of natural defences of the sand. And like many small nations, Philippines being one of them, Antigua and Barbuda is certainly the same. Their contribution to greenhouse gas pollution is tiny, but the impact of the global is potentially hugely significant. So what's going to happen? Air temperature, this is for Antigua, for most of the Caribbean, not Antigua. Air temperature will rise, sea surface temperatures will rise, sea levels will rise, carbon dioxide's going up, hurricanes, again, precipitation. So more droughts, but when it rains it's going to get how much time?
Got a minute and a half.
Lovely. But it will be drier during the year, but when it does rain it's really going to rain hard. That is a quick picture of what happens in a hurricane, which we'll gloss over. And then, St John's Harbour, hang on, what is challenges. So, really, there is large amounts of legislation that's sort of grown up since the 1940s. One of the big problems with the legislation in Antigua and Barbuda is that it's disjointed. Things have grown up, but without any kind of reference to any others. MPAs are a good example of this. There's no central repository for environmental information, so when the department dreams up a thing like a Beach Protection Act, it doesn't work with any of the other departments to find out what they're doing. Obviously, one of the things about MPAs is you want to make sure that they are working in conjunction with other stakeholders. This hasn't happened. Antigua and Barbuda basically lack any kind of integrated coastal management plan that countries such as Belize, not too far away, have done since sort of the 80s. They realised they couldn't just work in isolation, they had to get stakeholders involved. to get local fishermen involved, because the fishermen just thought that MPAs were there to take away their livelihoods, and of course they're not. It's all about educating and working with them. Again, just because there's no money, UN is cutting most of their funding. Again, as Jen said, actually the government, local governments now are expected to manage their own finances in terms of this, so we've got to use some of that money from tourism, I guess. Examples of the problems of damage to coral reefs still in the MPAs. Cades Bay was designated an MPA in 1999, but there's still uncontrolled boating and diving. People chucking the anchors over, there's still damage to the reefs happening even though. Sand mines, despite the Beach Protection Act and lack of hurricane disaster planning or response, there just isn't one. And that used to be, as beautiful as it looks, a mangrove forest, and it is now completely and utterly destroyed. Yeah.
What's interesting is, we've not assumed, but you've expected that everyone here will look at put your picture up again for us. Can you flip back to your end? We would all sit there and we can imagine it still looks quite nice, but then again it looks pretty grey outside today. But there is that thing, I think down on the ground it will probably feel a lot more human impact. But it's difficult, not seeing what it was like before, but we can imagine, it would be pristine. However, a vast number of other people would look at that and go, that's where I'm going on holiday.
Yeah. Well, that is why I used it at the front.
Yes.
Because it just looks like a beautiful place,
yes.
doesn't it? But obviously, all around here, this was all mangrove forest, all around here. This is a sort of major barrier between here and the rest of the island. This is St John's Harbour. St John's is there, so it's just right there. And obviously the sort of storm surges coming in, there's just that risk of flooding as a result of moving all that stuff away.
Do you think they're worried about the fact that they're going to have a lot more? I mean, they've built all of that, and they're going to have those tourists coming in, and that's going to help. But is that still realistic in the fact that they may well be having a huge amount more hurricanes that will destroy?
I think Caribbean, and this is sort of my own sort of personal experience of Caribbean life, is that it sort of tends to take one day at a time. It's really not very good at looking at the future, 50 years hence. Other people are quite good at doing it. One of the problems that places like Antigua and Barbuda have is that anybody who has any potential for working, university education is almost impossible on the island. So people move away, they go to the States or they come to the UK and they study, and then they go off and they do other things, or they stay in the States and the UK and they don't go back to Antigua. It means that there's a sort of, for want of a better word, a bit of a brain drain in terms of people going from the island, and that the thought just really isn't going into it. There's also, I'm certain that there's quite a lot of underhand dealings. The Barbuda situation is interesting. So obviously there was huge devastation. Most people lost their homes. They evacuated the whole place. They didn't just go to Antigua. They came down to St Vincent and sort of various other places where other kind of bits of family were and stuff like that. But they're still not returning. And the worry is that the government will start building extra hotels in the background whilst nobody's actually looking, and actually doing exactly the sort of things that a lot of their legislation is supposed to guard against. Because their one goal is to get people in here, to the hotels and in here on the boats. There's a huge golf course about there, which brings in a huge amount of money. When you look at it, exactly as you say, if you look at that, you just go, oh, it's beautiful, that's where I want to go. I can get married on the beach, or have a honeymoon there, it'd be just amazing. But actually, they've created quite a significant problem for themselves in that. And it just doesn't seem to, in all the stuff that you read, and actually it's quite difficult to come across. There's like one major study in the last 5 years on impacts of climate change on Antigua in particular. There's quite a bit for the Caribbean, which actually look at Antigua, and there's one guy. There's one guy that's writing all the reports, so he comes up quite a lot. But yeah.
Okay.
But then do they not weigh up the amount of money that they're earning from tourism with how much they're going to be spending on the aid?
Yeah, so the money that's being earned from tourism goes into people's pockets. It doesn't necessarily go to the government.
So when a devastation does happen, the government's hand to fall.
A real, the big example of this is that there is I still can't find, and I spent quite a long time looking for it, because the last report that I read from 2015 said there is no hurricane disaster planning and response. There isn't any. And so when it happens, they all go, oh, it's a hurricane, rebuild. Barbuda just rebuilt from the last ones in the mid-90s.
I suppose they get so many, they're used to it.
Well, the problem is I think what they don't appreciate is that they're going to get more severe. What happened last year, that was the first time that the islands had to be evacuated. That's probably going to happen again in the future because the defences aren't there. If they start removing the mangroves, then they're shut up.
It's okay.